That's better. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. Good morning on Thursday, March 30th, 2023. Thank you for joining us virtually and synchronously. And this Zoom link that I sent out, this is good for the remainder of the semester. Okay. So if everything goes well on my end, we'll be doing this synchronously, but if I have to sometimes not be here synchronously, I will let you know ahead of time, okay? And hope everything is going well for you back in Lawrence. I miss all of you, and I hope that your preparation for the next major assignment is going well. That's due on Wednesday, April 5th. All right. So, and please remember that our lectures are being recorded. Okay, so you want to keep your microphones muted and your cameras shut off and that kind of thing. Okay. So I'm not going to say much more now, except to go to the PowerPoint. And sorry, one more thing. I'm a little bit behind on the lectures. There isn't very much reading left. There's one more day after today left of this module. Okay, so please go ahead and complete the readings for this module. And I'm going to record a lecture for the readings on, well, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to record a lecture for the readings that were assigned for today. Couple short ones on reconstruction. I will post that before the weekend. And then next week, we will start the new module 4. Okay? All right. So I'm going to share the screen and we will launch into the latest lecture. Okay? So hope you can all see this. And okay. All right. So here we go. And today's powerful positive words from, oh, sorry, go back, from the great Albert Einstein. People like you and I, though mortal, of course, like everyone else, do not grow old, no matter how long we live. What I mean is that we never cease to stand like curious children before the great mystery into which we were born. Albert Einstein. Okay, and go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize my window here. All right. All right, so mainly today I will be talking to you about W.E.B. Du Bois, who wrote The Black Worker, which you read for this module. It was, again, we're a little bit behind. I'm a little bit behind. So that gives you more time to process this extremely important article for this module. In fact, of all the articles for this module, Du Bois's Black Worker is right at the center of it, okay? So this was a photograph taken in 1898. W.E.B. Du Bois on the left, his son Burghardt, and his spouse Nina, okay? So a family man, among other things. Next slide. I think. There we go. Okay. So March 30th, 2023, Thursday, start off with a little bit more on Jason Phillips, Reconstruction in Mississippi, then go into W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay, little background on Mississippi more recently. The state, I believe, is the poorest in the whole country. If it's not the poorest, it's close to it. So Mississippi has a long history of racial and economic stratification. And so recently there still is a water crisis in Jackson, Mississippi, the capital, a majority Black population there. And the water is contaminated. And it's a fact in this country, in many places, that communities where people of color are in the majority, they often suffer from what's called environmental racism. So toxicity in some of these locations, contaminated water. And yeah, this is from 2022, and the Guardian newspaper, Jackson water crisis, Mississippi accused of intolerable racial discrimination, state officials accused of violating civil rights, which resulted in persistently unsafe and unreliable drinking water for residents. So problems persist in Mississippi. And recent movie Till, about Emmett Till, who was murdered, lynched, a teenager in 1955 in Mississippi. This terrible event was a catalyst for the African American freedom struggle. I have not seen this movie. I definitely am going to need to catch up, but it got a lot of attention, and rightly so. Danielle Deadwyler was seen as a very likely Oscar prospect as Emmett Till's mother. She actually did not get nominated, but still, I'm sure it was fantastic performance in a super important movie. So the review of this movie, Till, the headline from the Washington Post, Till lands a gut punch with the tale of Emmett Till's murder. So Mississippi still in the news. All right, next slide. Jason Phillips again, just to remind you of what he looks like. Very good article. Reconstruction in Mississippi. Okay, I said some about it in our last lecture, which is on video, available on Canvas. Okay, sent you a link, so I hope you've watched and listened to that. Next slide. Okay, so Phillips says some things about economics, impact on Reconstruction in Mississippi. Obviously, this is going to be huge, or was huge. So Mississippi had a predominantly agricultural economic base, and the production of cotton was dominant in that state. So given that economic base, there were some factors there that made the Reconstruction process more problematic in a lot of ways. And so the planters in Mississippi, obviously they were in a state of shock. They saw their whole economic system, and of course their racist ideology, mentality overturned. They didn't know what to do. So they were very much on the defensive. And so they were very much, for the most part, lashing out at Reconstruction and at the Black population in Mississippi. Phillips discusses the economic implications of the black codes. So these were meant to take away the little power, the little freedom that African Americans were experiencing after the Civil War in Mississippi. And so the sharecropping system arose. This was a very unequal system in which freed black people would be locked into working the land that was owned by whites. And it wasn't slavery in name, but it was pretty much identical to slavery in its effects. It bound black people to white people's land, and yeah, whites were in control. So sharecropping, yeah, it was a way of perpetuating the inequalities in Mississippi and elsewhere in the South. But the focus here is with Phillips's Mississippi. Okay? So that reinforces some of his points in the article. Go to the next slide. All right, so two black men who experienced some temporary power that was pretty much historically unprecedented in the South after Reconstruction. So Hiram R. Revels, he was the first black member of the U.S. Senate. He's on the left. Blanche K. Bruce, he was the second black member of the U.S. Senate. He's on the right. I think both men served Mississippi, but I could be mistaken there. Okay, let me check that. But the main thing that's important is that these men, like other black men, this was an achievement of Reconstruction. They were serving as elected officials. And of course, this was inconceivable before Reconstruction to whites. And so it upset them, obviously. But it gave some whites and most blacks quite a bit of hope. Okay? Go to the next slide. All right. A little bit on the political and social impact of Reconstruction in Mississippi. So again, black Mississippians, they made notable political progress. The men I just showed you, and there were others, okay? And so at least 226 black Mississippians held public office during Reconstruction. That's in Phillips's article. So this was a huge advance. The article also mentions James Lusk Alcorn. I'm going to let you find out about him on your own, okay? Maybe that's something that can be mentioned, looked at in discussion. But there were seeds of biracial political influence. Some whites in Mississippi did want change. And of course, this was at great personal risk to their safety. White people who supported Reconstruction, as you could imagine, and you'd be right, most whites in Mississippi did not like these white people, okay? So there's that. However, the pushback, white supremacy, racist terror, it became more intense as Reconstruction went on. So many whites fought the change in Mississippi. All right. So we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so on to Du Bois now. Put Phillips aside for now. and go deep with W.E.B. Du Bois and Black Reconstruction in America. Okay. Well, actually, The Black Worker is a chapter from this extremely important book. So that Du Bois wrote, okay? One of his many books, a prolific author, okay? Go to the next slide. I'm going to give you some background about him. Just as a reminder, that Du Bois influenced David Roediger's history that we read, Lerone Bennett's. I didn't assign any of Eric Foner's historical scholarship, but we talked about him and you saw him in the Reconstruction documentary, very much influenced by Du Bois. So he remains a major intellectual force in this country and throughout the field of history and American studies and other fields, okay? He was born in 1868, Massachusetts. This was 3 years after the end of the Civil War. He attended Fisk University. This was in Tennessee. That was his first institution of higher education. He went on to Harvard, where he became the first Black person to earn a PhD from that university. In 1900, he was part of what was called the Pan-African Conference. So this means that people from all over the world who claimed descent from African peoples, they got together in solidarity to advance the Black race and to combat racism. Okay, so Du Bois was fighting for progress from very early period in the United States, before the 20th century. Okay, and in 1905 he continued. All right, the Niagara movement. This was super important because the Niagara movement in 1905 was one of these efforts that eventually led to the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. So in 1909 to 1910, Du Bois was instrumental in founding the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the United States, still very active. And there are chapters of the NAACP in many communities, including Lawrence, Kansas. So in his younger days, there's Du Bois. Okay? We'll go to the next slide. A photograph from 1888, also Du Bois in his younger days, with some of his fellow students at Fisk University. So this is an historically Black university. Okay? So this would have been they would have considered themselves the elite of the Black race at this stage. And Du Bois believed that he and other members of this Black elite, which he called the talented 10th, had a responsibility to demonstrate their excellence and lead the entire race forward. Okay? Go to the next slide. All right. There he is, much older. Now, Du Bois lived a very long time. Saw most of the 20th century, almost made it to 100. So I'm jumping way ahead to 1950 here. This was many years after he wrote The Black Worker, okay? So in 1950, he participated in an organization, the Peace Information Center. So he was working for global peace, and he became an independent candidate for the US Senate in New York State. He did not garner many votes, but he was, and he was very much on the left, okay? So I think about the closest person or the closest people you would find to Du Bois's politics nowadays, people like Bernie Sanders, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This would be close to Du Bois's political stance, very much on the left, okay? A socialist. Or not going to sugarcoat it. W.E. Du Bois joined the Communist Party in the 20th century. And I'll say some more about this. It's obviously super controversial, and it will cause some people to, it's going to be a deal breaker for some people, right? That some people will not want to have anything to do with Du Bois because of this. So we'll talk a little bit more about that couple minutes, about why he was attracted to this viewpoint. But next point. So by 1951, however, of course, with his radical politics and some of his activism, Du Bois had definitely gotten the attention of the US government, right in the middle of the Cold War here. And so he was put on trial as an unregistered foreign agent, but he was acquitted, okay? So this was, I kind of think, a fancy way of, some people saw Du Bois as a traitor, okay? So there's that. And so in 1952, the US government took an even more serious step. They denied Du Bois a passport. They were looking to make, his life difficult, his activist life difficult, didn't want him going around the world criticizing the United States for its racism. Among other things, he was denied a passport. However, eventually he was restored his passport, and he traveled to Ghana in West Africa, where he eventually, in 1963, he died 5 years at age 95, okay? So he was one of those people who, some people who are not pleased with conditions in the United States, the reaction to such people sometimes is, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you leave? And in fact, Du Bois did that. So there's that. All right. We'll go to the next slide. I think that's all right, there we go. All right, so I'll tell you about the photograph here in a second. Let me check on time here. Okay, we're doing well. All right. This is a quote to know about, and to, if you, it's one of the, perhaps the main reason why The Black Worker reading and the book it came from are so important. So Du Bois' assertion is, the chief witness in Reconstruction, the emancipated slave himself, has been almost barred from court. his written Reconstruction record has been largely destroyed and nearly always neglected. So, as an historian, Du Bois was committed to restoring the testimony of emancipated, enslaved persons, that the historians who had been writing about Reconstruction had gotten it wrong. And not only wrong, but wrong in a racist way. So he set about correcting that as he saw it. So on the right here, you have a photograph from 1950. This is at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And this was the first degree granting institution, historically Black college, okay? And so Du Bois in the middle there with Mary McLeod Bethune. She was a prominent Black woman who was one of the first major, founders of historically Black colleges and universities. She was also an advisor to President Franklin Roosevelt. And then on the far right there, you have Dr. Horace Mann Bond. He was the president of Lincoln University at the time. So Du Bois was being awarded by Lincoln University in 1950. We'll go to the next slide. All right. Let me set out some main points about the Black worker. And this was from Chapter 1 of Black Reconstruction. And we assigned this for last week, okay? So Du Bois revises Reconstruction history by using new methods to analyze race, class, and their relationships. He was doing something new in Reconstruction historiography, okay? I'm going to define that term soon, historiography. And Marxism was one of Du Bois's methods. So Karl Marx had a particular theory of history that influenced Du Bois and many others, okay? So there's no doubt that Marx, as controversial as he was, has been a major intellectual influence ever since he did his work in the 1800s. And there are others we could mention who controversial. Sigmund Freud, Charles Darwin, Friedrich Nietzsche, all controversial thinkers, all have still profound influence on intellectuals to this day, okay? So yeah, Marxism was one of Du Bois's methods, and you need to remember what Jason Phillips, who wrote the Mississippi article, what he says about Du Bois. I'm going to remind you of that in a minute. He says this in his article, okay? We'll go to that. Here's what he says. According to Jason Phillips, Du Bois wrote Black Reconstruction in America to challenge racist interpretations of the Reconstruction period. These interpretations dominated the early 20th century. He encouraged America to explore an honest history of that time. All right. So, very important. Go to the next slide. Here is this photograph is from 1949. And you have on the left there, man named Paul Robeson. He was born in 1898, died in 1976. He did some work with W.E.B. Du Bois. They were at a gathering, the World Peace Congress in Paris, France. Paul Robeson was another Black man who fought racism at a time and was proud of his race at a time when it was particularly dangerous to do so. And he went to Rutgers. Robeson did. He was an all-star athlete in many sports, an opera singer. Not just that, he sang all kinds of genres. He was a stage and film actor, just an incredible artist. His career was basically destroyed because of his radical politics. So when you talk about cancel culture, or if whoever talks about cancel culture, and we hear a lot about it nowadays, but there's no doubt that Paul Robeson was definitely canceled. And to take it even further, there were several attempts made on his life. So people did try to assassinate Paul Robeson. And so, yeah, he was prevented from making a livelihood, and his passport was confiscated as well. Lloyd Brown, who was an African-American novelist, the caption at the bottom, and his claim was that Paul Robeson was the most persecuted, the most ostracized, the most condemned Black man in America then or ever. That's certainly a debatable point, but there's no doubt that Robeson did suffer a lot of persecution. No question about it. We'll go to the next slide. All right, well, we need to know a little bit about Marx, at least, and to understand how he shaped what Du Bois did, okay? So here are some claims from the huge body of writing that Marx did. He lived from 1818 to 1883. And for better or worse, his work did change the world, no doubt. And so one of his key statements from 1845 was, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. So Marx had, he picked a fight with a lot of other philosophers by stating this and doing what he did. And also, here's another big one from the same year. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch. The ruling ideas, i.e., that is, the class which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. So, in other words, according to Marx, the rich people, the people with the greatest economic power, their ideas dominate society. He who has the gold, or they who have the gold, make the rules, according to Marx. And he says that's true in every epoch. Okay, so these are sweeping generalizations. Okay, big claims. So we need to be skeptical of sweeping generalizations. Okay, and Marx encouraged that. He one of his articles was titled "For a Ruthless Criticism of Everything Existing." Okay, Next point. Another generalization. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Okay? So Marx saw class struggle as the dominant historical force throughout space and time, throughout human history. If you don't understand that, according to Marx, you don't understand history. Now, we don't see much about race in anything here, not explicitly, okay? So one thing that Du Bois did was to bring race to Marxism, or bring Marxism to race. Either way, okay? We'll go to the next slide. All right. Take a deep breath here. And now another image here. This is from the Reconstruction era. And this is in support of Reconstruction and anti-President Andrew Johnson. And what it spins off of here, the central image is from the play Othello by William Shakespeare. And of course, the villain in Othello, Iago. Here, Andrew Johnson is portrayed as Iago. And Othello, who was a Moor, a black man in the play, and the hero of the title character of the play, he is represented as an African-American Civil War veteran. And so Iago does terrible things to Othello, okay? And this veteran. Other things that are depicted in this image, you can't really see them too well here, but there's a scene of a slave auction. There's a scene of white people attacking African Americans in Memphis and New Orleans. There are snakes depicted as copperheads and Confederate States of America wrapped around a black man while Andrew Johnson and others watch. Okay, so a very pro-Reconstruction, anti-Confederacy image. Go to the next slide. Take a deep breath, because here comes a definition of historiography. So, how history is done, basically. Historiography is the way historians have defined, have remembered, written about, interpreted, and taught specific historical eras and events throughout the generations. Okay? How historians do what they do. Next point. So, when we study the historiography of a particular era, we focus on the ways that memories and interpretations of that era have changed. So here, we want to be thinking about Reconstruction historiography, right? That's essential to think about, so we can know why Du Bois's achievement was so important. Okay, historiography. We'll go to the next slide. Okay. So again, his book, Black Reconstruction, from which the article, The Black Worker, comes, it was an alternative to what's called redemptionist historiography. He rejected redemptionist historiography of the Civil War and its aftermath. Okay? So let's define redemptionist historiography. First point, the redemptionist historiographers, they depicted the South as having a so-called lost cause and depicted that as a good thing, as noble. All right? So if any of you are familiar with the very famous motion picture Gone with the Wind from 1939, there you have a very well-known and influential fictional depiction of the South as carrying out a noble cause, as having a honorable set of motives, an honorable way of life during the Civil War. Okay? Next point. The redemptionist historiographers, they portrayed emancipated Black people as bad, as terrible, as ignorant, as rapacious, meaning, as you might guess, that the portrayed Black men especially as being potential rapists, as a danger to white women, as they portrayed them as corrupt. They portrayed them as manipulated by Northern, the term carpetbaggers, okay? And these people would, the idea they came with their belongings on a stick, they came from the North, and they were there to, contaminate the Southern Black people by manipulating them and turning them against the white South, okay? So the idea that if there weren't outsiders coming in, that everything would be okay in the South. All right, so this is what the redemptionist historiographers did when writing about Reconstruction. And it was what Du Bois was going up against. Go to the next slide. Actually, this is a good place to stop. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to stop the lecture right here. And I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to catch up by putting together a recorded lecture for you. But we'll just close with another image here of, this is another image in support of Reconstruction from the time and against the Confederacy. So you have a Black man on the ground here representing the entire Black race. And you have, he's being held down, immobile on the ground, literally by, and this has its problems too, and how it depicts some of this situation here, because in the picture, you can see on the far left of the picture, this man who is portrayed as ape-like is supposed to represent an Irish person, okay? And he's holding a club marked vote. And in the middle, you have a man representing the lost cause, holding a big knife that's marked CSA, Confederate States of America. And on the far left of the picture, representing some kind of corrupt political official, all right? But this is another editorial cartoon of the time meant to support radical reconstruction. Okay. So let me stop sharing. Okay. That's it for now. Thank you so much for watching and listening. This is being recorded like all the lectures from here on out. So if you had to leave early or for whatever reason, it's there for you. All right. So thanks so much. And looking forward to more of these, and you have my best wishes. Have a great Thursday. Take care.